So basically, what do you call yourself? Like, are you a fabric artist or what?
I just say that I'm a sewer. Like, I sew stuff, I make stuff. I do work for film, I do props, I do costumes, I've done theater work, custom work, repairs, alterations. I have all of my machines set up in a really nice arrangement with my rolly chair in the middle. So for efficiency, I keep a punching bag here. I wanted to be able to have some gym equipment.
Hi, Tina.
Hey, Ray, how you doing? Welcome.
Thank you. So this is your spot.
This is my spot. Welcome to Oona.
First of all, tell me, what do you do here?
What do I do here? I kind of do a little bit of everything. I mean, sewing is kind of my main deal, but I use it for all sorts of purposes. So I do a line of my own called Oona. I do a small production. I design and produce a line of gender-affirming undergarments for another company. It makes sense to have their logo in it, but I do work for film. I do props. I do costumes. I've done theater work, custom work, repairs, alterations.
Wow.
Just general sewing and more.
How does this start? It starts with, I guess, a phone call.
We've got something for you. Are you available? And unless I absolutely can't, I will pretty much always say yes, even if I don't know what it is yet, because I know that it's going to be an adventure.
That you're right. It's always, that's good. I think the first thing we try to do, once we find out that you are available and you can do this for us, which makes us really happy. And it's really happy because we can depend upon you. I mean, that's what it comes down to. And then I think the next thing is, once you say yes, and then we can get together with the project, at that point, then it's really important, I think, to give you as much information as I can, so that you know the process and the context that it's in. Theater work?
I've done a lot of theater work. Not as much lately, but over time, I have a lot of friends who are actors and people who have worked as like GMs for like a youth theater company, or folks that work in set design and costume design for theater. And it's an entirely different way of thinking and a way of going about things. And then I also did 2 seasons in the Vancouver Opera costume shop. So I've worked on like from very small scale, like we don't have any budget, here's a bag of curtains, can you make us what we need, to working in the opera shop, which obviously is, you know, they've got a more extensive stock, but then oftentimes the builds for that are a lot more complicated than it would be for, you know, a smaller production. The first season, it was a show that was more contemporary than what they had costumes for, because instead of the 1620s, it took place in the 1920s. And so the entire show had to be built. And I had a friend who worked as a set builder there for almost 20 years. And so he recommended me to them. And then through that, then I ended up getting called back for the next season. But because I have lots of other things on the go, I moved on. Like I didn't continue going back. There was a, you know, very, very interesting experience, but I think I'd also started doing things like props was starting to come into my life as well. So I was focused more on being in my own studio rather than somewhere else. Great experience. Lots of knowledge in my pocket after that.
Yeah.
So
I guess.
I got hired to do some very, very tricky kind of bonkers costumes, but I had already started working in props. And so I had a little bit more experience being asked to make things out of unconventional things in a very short period of time. And so I was able to draw on my prop skills, because everything in a panto is a quick change. And a lot of the things that I was asked to make, they had to look like something else in the real world,
Right.
but weren't that actual thing, and they needed to function completely differently. You know, I built like a pipeline costume, but 3 people had to wear it, and it was 12 feet long and couldn't be stored as a 12-foot long item.
Right.
So I had to engineer zipping it apart.
Gotcha.
Anyway, yeah, so
Wow.
it's, yeah, I've got like this broad range, but they really have all helped me be better at each one of them. My work community, a lot of the people that I spend time with and am interested in talking to and dealing with, and also too calling on when I either like have a question about something that I've never done before. I have painters in my life, people who work with leather. My neighbor right here is a framer, like a picture framer, custom framing, and we've been able to help each other quite a bit as well. So it's more creative types than not, for sure. But also too, just, you know, people doing amazing things keeps you inspired, and it keeps you curious, and it just kind of keeps the creative juices flowing. So it keeps you ready for new projects coming at you.
Nice.
You know?
And then in film, so what are some of those projects that stand out to you that you remember the most?
One of them was making bows and arrows for the Shawnee tribe circa 1750, and I believe it was Wisconsin. And I was brought dowels that were just bare and some sheets of brass, and it was one of the coolest things because it was something that I didn't know so much about, but I got to find out about it. What, you know, who were those people, and, you know, learning about how they made their arrowheads, because it was different than anybody else. So I got to not just like learn a new skill, because I had to learn how to cut them. I had to learn how to tie them on, what they tied them on with. I got to source, you know, I found out that they used sinew, and there's a whole world of synthetic and natural sinew. The way they cut the feathers. Also, okay, what kind of trees would they have used? Like what kind of trees were growing in the area that this came from? So when I go to dye the dowels, not only how am I going to dye them, but how can I get them to look the closest to what they would have looked like coming from that area in that period of time being used by those people. You know, obviously, I think this is why you're interested in talking to people, because it's on the surface, it doesn't seem, it's like, oh, it was just some bows and arrows. And it's not necessarily how long they're going to be seen on screen or how close. For me anyway, I just really care about doing something correctly, especially when it is something outside of my community. You know, making sure, like I watched videos of, you know, young Indigenous people from that community tying those arrowheads on and doing it correctly. Wow. Even if nobody ever saw it, it feels like the right thing to do, you know. Yeah. But I also learned so much more about a community and about some history that I didn't know before. And I think that applies to a lot of the projects.
We send you such a range of projects, everything from making custom cast chair backs for, you know, yeah. for larger oversized chairs or different sized chairs depending on what we need, or vinyl covers for OR beds, or stuffed animal toys, or sewing patches onto backpacks. Mm-hmm. You know, when I think of it, there's been so many different ones. And do a couple of other ones stand out in memory for you? Or one
that stands out for sure was a compression suit. The compression suit.
So that's a medical suit.
It was a medical suit, and so it was, you know, basically an entire, like a blood pressure suit. I did look into it at the time, but it was a pretty big build in a pretty short period of time. So I mostly, like, aesthetically wanted to make sure that I got it right. I didn't have as much time to read more about all of the things that it's used for in like a real life practical sense. But it was so it was so fascinating and so important to get it right and make it look like it would function. Obviously, it wasn't made to function properly, but to just understand why it was being used and why it looked the way that it looked, and also without using all of the exact same materials that a real one would be made out of, getting it as close aesthetically to looking like it's made out of the exact same stuff. And that one was just really cool also too, because it was a big build. You know, there were arm pieces, a chest piece, leg pieces for the torso. And that one, I just thought that one was really cool. And I think it was probably to that point, like the biggest medical related thing that I had done.
Because you'd done many medical things. You'd done, I think, some cooling blankets, right?
Those ones, that was like,
I think
those were one of the biggest.
Yeah. I think we gave you a sample of a real cooling blanket, which is, it was blue and it had all these tubes sewn into it so that the liquid would flow through it and cool the body down and basically replicate, but they were too small and we needed them bigger.
You needed them huge. Yeah, I think the ones that you brought me were maybe 2 by 3 feet. So I used a small rope that was about the same size of the tubes to sew in, and each one of them ended up having about 170 feet worth. And so it was about the length of a 17-story building, which is kind of crazy. And even though the map looks like a bunch of squiggles, it was really helpful to make sure that I got it right. And it ended up being a really, really cool, fun project.
How did you get interested in working with fabric?
I went to university on an academic scholarship. Surprise. And within a very, very short period of time, I realized that I hated it. People just talk at you and then you basically just write about what they talked about, and it was very boring. So I walked across town and applied to the local college. I applied to one program, which was fashion design. At that point, I did not know how to use a sewing machine, and I didn't have any experience other than just like hand making some things. But as I've been asked that question over time, I realized that as a kid, I always was interested in it. All of my daydreams, I always figured out what everybody was wearing before I figured out the story. And then as soon as everybody was set with their suits, I was kind of done. and playing with Barbies and things, I wouldn't actually, like my Barbies didn't talk to each other. I would just talk about what was going to happen to them while I perfected their outfits, while I perfected their hair.
Oh, interesting.
And I would make them little clothes, but it was always just like, without actual knowledge, I would figure out ways to make a flat piece of felt or something into a dress or something like that. So I think I always had an interest in it. I just didn't know it until years and like even years after I finished design school. I still didn't really know why I did it. And now I think that's probably like, that's kind of what's come as the explanation, you know, decades down the road.
I had 2 sisters who were a little bit older than me, and I remember them with the paper cutout dresses and putting that onto the paper dolls, basically.
Yeah.
And I just remember as a young kid, I was thinking, geez, that must be frustrating, trying to bend over the tabs and keeping the dresses to stay on the paper dolls.
Yeah. Well, and even like, you know, again, with my Barbies, I had a bookshelf in my room that it opened with a curtain, probably something my dad rigged up, but it just had like 2 big shelves. And I did not put books. I made it into their apartment, but I would, in the garage, I would find little blocks of wood and I would make the furniture, but I would upholster it. Like I was just always figuring out how to create these things, but I just wasn't conscious of what I was doing. I just knew that I wanted it to be a certain way. And I guess like the audacity of youth, I was like, well, I can probably do it. You know, like I don't need to have these things brought in. I'm like, I'll do it.
So I think you gave us a little bit of an idea earlier before, but you've got an underwear line.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I've got an underwear line that kind of is umbrellaed underneath a clothing line that I do. So I do my own design. I do it start to finish here, so it's all my own patterns. I cut everything. Anything that gets screen printed, I do all of my own printing, and then
really?
and then everything is sewn here as well. So, a T-shirt with a print on it, it's not just a T-shirt that I bought for cheap somewhere and then I'm putting my own designs on it. I actually make the T-shirt.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you actually print here, or you send out to get printed?
No, I do all of my own screen printing, and I make all of my own screens. Wow. And primarily, they're all hand painted as well. So they're my own little drawings. A lot of them are quite small because they are meant to fit on first and foremost on underwear panels. So they're usually like within a 3" by 4" size. But I'm a drawer by nature, and I don't get that much time to do it. And so when I draw my own images and then spend the time hand painting the screens, it just gives me a little bit more time with them. But also I think it translates onto the product, because it's very clear that time and care has gone into it.
Tina, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.